Update 2. At my dad's funeral, my brother said, "He's just here for the money, Dad's going to cut him off." Everyone watched the lawyer enter, holding a USB. My dad's face appeared on the screen and said 3 words. After the solemn, suffocating ceremony at the funeral home, the procession moved to my father's sprawling, opulent house, the same house where I'd scraped my knees, learned to ride my bike, and played countless games of hide and seek. Now it felt like a gilded cage. Every polished surface, every framed family photo on the wall, like an accusation aimed solely at me. The air was thick with the clinking of glasses, forced laughter, and the overwhelming scent of expensive catering, masking the underlying tension that hummed beneath the polite chatter. I moved through the living room, a stranger in my own childhood home. Mark and Lindsay immediately staked their claim on the main conversation hub, a semicircle of comfortable armchairs near the grand piano. They engaged in animated conversations with various relatives and family friends, often casting pointed, dismissive glances my way. Lindsay, always the grand performer, would casually drop a story about her new designer handbag or the costly renovations she'd helped Dad plan for the house, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, her gaze flickering to me like she was checking off a mental list of my failures. Mark, meanwhile, kept glancing at his expensive Patek Philippe watch, a non-verbal cue of how little time he had for my presence, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient stain on their perfect family portrait. Oh, Jason, Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, approached me, her face etched with genuine concern. "It's good to see you. You've grown so much." She pressed a warm hand into mine, a rare moment of human connection in this sterile environment. She was one of the few who had always been kind, even if she couldn't fully grasp the depth of the family's dysfunction. Before I could reply, Mark's voice cut through the air, carrying just a little too loudly from across the room. "You know, Dad always said he admired people who built something from nothing, unlike some who prefer to rely on handouts." A ripple of uncomfortable silence followed, and I felt my cheeks flush. I knew the barb was meant for me, a not-so-subtle jab at my struggles after I left. Lindsay then chimed in, her tone a little more subtle but equally cutting. "It's just so sad, isn't it? Dad spent his last years surrounded by those who truly cared, those who stayed close. Some people just drift away, I suppose." She sighed dramatically, as if bearing the weight of the world, then took a long sip from her champagne flute. I felt a familiar knot of anger tighten in my stomach, a slow burn that had become a constant companion over the years. My jaw clenched, and I stared at a faded family photo on the mantelpiece, one where my face had been subtly yet clearly cropped out. My fingers trembled so hard I almost dropped my phone, which I'd been holding on to like a lifeline. The afternoon wore on, a relentless assault of passive aggression and thinly veiled insults. Every interaction was a reminder of my outcast status. I felt like a ghost haunting my own past. I considered leaving, just turning around and walking out the door, reclaiming the solitary peace I had carved out for myself. But something held me there, a stubborn spark of hope, perhaps, that buried deep beneath the resentment there might be a glimmer of reconciliation, or maybe just plain morbid curiosity. Then the murmuring shifted. A hush fell over the room as Mr. Henderson, my father's longtime lawyer, entered the living room. He was a man of quiet dignity, his gray hair neatly combed, his suit impeccably tailored. He carried a slim leather briefcase, and in his hand, a small, unassuming USB drive. My stomach lurched. This was it, the moment everyone had been waiting for, the reading of the will. Mark immediately straightened, his smug confidence returning. He leaned over to a cousin, speaking just loud enough for me and anyone with an earshot to hear. "He's just here for the money, Dad's going to cut him off." You know how Dad felt about his choices. No doubt it's all going to Lindsay and me. We were the ones who were there. His voice was laced with a triumphant certainty, a public declaration of my impending humiliation. The air in the room practically vibrated with anticipation, a silent judgment hanging over me, a judgment I'd been living with for a decade. The cousins exchanged knowing glances, some offered me pitying looks, others avoiding my eyes altogether. A tiny, irrational part of me, the part that still clung to the idealized image of a loving father from my earliest memories, wished Mark was wrong, wished that my father, in his final act, would acknowledge the son he had cast aside. It was a foolish hope, I knew, but it persisted, a faint flicker in the encroaching darkness. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we are here today to read the last will and testament of Thomas Miller." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the room. However, Mr. Miller left very specific instructions. Before the will is formally read, he wished for a personal message to be shared with his family. He produced the USB drive, holding it aloft for a moment before plugging it into a projector connected to a large screen that had been discreetly set up in the corner of the room. A ripple of surprise went through the room. Mark's perfectly coiffed eyebrow twitched, and Lindsay's poised smile tightened, a barely perceptible crack in her polished facade. They exchanged uneasy glances, their smug confidence momentarily faltering. The quiet whir of the projector coming to life seemed deafening in the sudden tense silence. The lights in the room dimmed, casting the space in a somber glow. Then my father's face, slightly gaunt but with surprising clarity, appeared on the screen, larger than life. His image was stark, his eyes looked directly into the camera and, therefore, directly at us. He wasn't smiling. "To my beloved family and friends," his recorded voice began, a little frail but undeniably his, "thank you for being here today, for honoring my memory." His words were calm, almost routine, lulling Mark and Lindsay back into a false sense of security. I could see them relax slightly, a flicker of their earlier smugness returning to their faces. They probably thought this was just a sentimental farewell, a final confirmation of their favored status. But then his tone suddenly shifted. He continued, "I've always believed in legacy, not just in the accumulation of wealth, but in the character we leave behind, the lessons we impart, and the integrity with which we live our lives." He paused, and his gaze seemed to deepen, as if peering into the very soul of the room. And in that pursuit, I must confess, I made mistakes, grave mistakes, mistakes born of pride and a misguided focus on appearances, mistakes that have weighed heavily on my conscience for many years. The burden of regrets, I've learned, is a heavy one to carry. He didn't specify, not yet, but my heart, which had been beating a slow, heavy rhythm, began to pound with a mix of dread and a faint flickering hope, a hope I hadn't dared to acknowledge until that very moment. Mark and Lindsay, however, simply dismissed it as typical old man ramblings, an expected platitude from a man facing his end. They had no idea what was coming, none of us did. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint whir of the projector and the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. My father's image filled the screen, his gaze unwavering, his voice gaining a surprising strength. He cleared his throat, and then, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion, broke through the polite silence, directly addressing the camera and, by extension, me. Jason, my son. I was wrong. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. The words hung in the air, reverberating through the room, cutting through the carefully constructed facade of the perfect family. This wasn't some vague platitude, this was a direct, raw confession. He went on, detailing the exact situation, the words tumbling out as if a dam had broken within him. 10 years ago, you called me. You were in crisis, scared, and you needed a father. And I failed you. I was consumed by my own pride, by the fear of what people would say, of how your divorce, your struggles, would reflect on my name, my reputation. I told you to make your own bed. I turned you away. His voice cracked. It was the greatest regret of my life. He spoke of the endless nights he'd lain awake, haunted by his callousness. He admitted he had secretly followed my life, using discreet channels to keep tabs on me and Ben. He'd witnessed my struggles, my tireless efforts to rebuild, my unwavering dedication to raising my son alone without a penny of help from him. He saw my resilience, my quiet dignity in the face of adversity. My pride, my foolish, misguided pride, prevented me from reaching out sooner, he confessed, a tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek on the screen. But I watched you. I saw the man you became, Jason, a man of integrity, a man who put his son above all else. And I realized I had abandoned the very son who embodied everything I claimed to value. A hot wave of something akin to grief mixed with an unexpected, fragile flicker of hope washed over me. It was an apology I never knew I still craved, a validation I'd long since buried. I felt a stinging sensation behind my eyes but refused to let the tears fall. Across the room, the reactions of Mark and Lindsay were a spectacle of raw, unadulterated shock. Mark's jaw dropped so hard I thought I heard a sickening click. His face, usually so composed, was a mask of horrified disbelief. Lindsay's perfectly manicured hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide, then narrowed as if struggling to comprehend this public dismantling of their perceived reality. Their carefully constructed masks had shattered. The father on screen paused, took a deep breath, and then, his voice firmer now, looked directly into the camera again, a faint, almost defiant gleam in his eyes. He uttered the